The values of our era are the values of youth: change, dynamism, emotionality, superficiality, competitiveness, and the race for success. Forever young, forever intoxicated by pure, meaning eternal youth in Latin, and puella, meaning eternal girl. They avoid burdening themselves with anything. This might be their key characteristic. They always act against rules that restrict a person. For the Puer and Puella, this means a miserable existence, being tied down. Irresponsible, cruel, selfish, and at the same time romantic, charming, and creative. This is how others describe men and women who in their 30s and 40s still hold on to a teenage view of the world. Do they ever really grow up? Let's figure it out today. This archetype, like all archetypes, has both positive and negative sides. It can bring energy, beauty, and creativity into adult life, or hinder self-realization, and doom us to unrealistic adolescent fantasies, perceiving life as a prison. The Puer and Puella avoid individuation and struggle with their inner drive towards psychological wholeness. This hinders their growth, though they have great imagination and a rich inner life. They do not bring it to consciousness and thus do not advance in life. The potential remains unrevealed, hidden in the depths of the unconscious. In The Matrix, the main character is offered a choice between a red and a blue pill. The blue pill allows him to remain content and comfortable in the simulated reality, an idea that ignorance is bliss. The red pill, on the other hand, allows him to confront the harsh truth of reality and begin the search for true meaning. The poor often chooses the blue pill, unable to commit to long-term work, relationships, discipline, or education. In general, anything that requires responsibility. Responsibility is like a red rag to a bull for them. In his book, Senex and Pure, Jungian analyst James Hillman delves deeply into this phenomenon. The negative traits of those who remain young for too long stay in adolescence, often combined with too much dependence on the mother. They flee from the cold, cruel world, seeking their childhood under the nurturing and protective circle of the mother. This unconscious temptation to return to her womb often makes it difficult for them to find work because nothing ever seems just right, always accompanied by a voice of doubt. The woman is never the right woman. She's fine as a girl, but there's always that but that prevents marriage or any commitment. The pure recognizes the transience of life, so he never fully engages in any experience, knowing that the end will bring disappointment and separation. Thus, he is always prepared to say goodbye, which increases the likelihood of ending experiences, further reinforcing his protective mechanism. The poor learns not to suffer by anticipating suffering, not living fully as a result. It seems reasonable to him, but overthinking can also be an illness. He gets stuck in this reflection, in the bubble he created that isolates him from life. One of his problems is that if the pure enters life, he will be confronted with the fact that he is mortal. This is a variation of the old mythological motif, according to which, upon leaving paradise, an archetypal maternal womb, a person falls into the realization of their incompleteness and mortality. The pure often exists in a state of sleepy torpor. Sometimes you feel like pouring a bucket of cold water over his head. However, this is just the surface. Looking deeper, you can see that inside him is a cherished, fantastical life. The poor may suffer from delusions of grandeur, thinking of himself as some extraordinary and special genius, a great philosopher in the making. But there's one catch. He has no tangible product to show for it. He's an artist without art. The poor dreams and engages in passive fantasy, which is very different from the technique of active imagination. Dreaming of success instead of visualizing actual steps may make one more prone to failure. The pure often leads a temporary life out of fear of getting into a situation he might not be able to escape. The Puer plans for the future because they require a rigid way of life and what could have been. He escapes into the world of fantasy to find something temporary. Any limitations feel unbearable. Tries to ascend as far as possible from reality. Is a life that is more eventually or less resembling Peter Pan, cut down to size. The boy who never grows up and lives in Neverland maintains a strange relationship with reality. A place where people try to stay forever, feeling that his job. The poor is often labeled with creative endeavors or relationships, a very common problem nowadays. They are just placeholders until the real thing comes along, leading to an anxious feeling of fragmentation. He compensates for this with a pursuit of thrills, whether through tics, alcohol, sex, sports, or reckless actions, that temporarily overcome the inner darkness of the soul. These restless, feverish searches for harmony create an illusion of selfhood. A person living temporarily is detached, spending time in fantasies that lead nowhere. In an ancient Greek fable, it is said that Thales of Miletus, considered the first philosopher, was once so lost in thought, gazing at the stars, that he fell into a well. How can one understand the heavens if they don't know what's beneath their feet? Although the Puer has a vivid imagination, he cannot translate these ideas into action because he lives in an ephemeral world. As a result, the Puer is not very successful in life. He wakes up at 11 a.m., lounges around with a cigarette in his mouth, giving in to his emotions. By day, he plans to work, but first he takes a walk with friends, then maybe with a girl, and then he philosophizes. He goes to bed well past midnight, and the next day repeats the previous one. Thus, his inner wealth is wasted, as he achieves nothing significant. The Puer has a great ability to absorb content, constantly learning, listening, studying, and it seems like he's going to put it all into practice, but he never does. The realization that one must adapt to reality is just an intellectual invention for them. Something they play out in fantasies, but never in reality. They simply cannot cross the boundary from fantasy to action. The word human comes from the Latin humus, meaning earth. To be human means to be humble, practical, and grounded in earthly experience, which contains a rich source of nourishment. For the Puella, it is important to remain in a state of potentiality, so she finds it difficult to make a choice, to settle on something and commit to it. It's not that the Puella regrets the choice she has made and wants to choose another alternative. No, she simply does not want to make any choice at all, to stop at one option and thus close off the entire range of possibilities. The eternal girl tries to attract attention from those around her, but doesn't feel she is truly a unique person with something to surprise, enchant, and hold the interest of her audience. The Puella slips away from another admirer, fearing the confrontation with an inner emptiness, with the absence of a clear self that would be required to present to a partner if the relationship develops. This leads to another characteristic of the Puella: emotional vagrancy. Spreading bright and dazzling rays, the Puella risks being caught by those who want to bring more celebration into their lives. Remember who in fairy tales plays the role of the one obsessed with catching the firebird. The dull, ordinary senex who, like any archetype, can manifest with positive or negative sides in interactions with the Puella. The senex often reveals his negative side, as the stories and real-life scenarios of relationships between men over 40 and women in their 20s show. Once caught in a cage, the bird stops singing, so there is no elixir of youth for the senex to draw from. For the Puella to radiate energy and generously share it with others, there must be no boundaries, no limitations on movement. This sounds wonderful, but in practice, it brings us to a significant limitation of this archetype that requires serious inner work. The desire to attract attention and being oriented toward pleasure and emotional experiences often leaves the Puella detached from her inner self, From this,
she doesn't
there is a
realize
negative
this
attitude
and is very
towards
afraid
any
of the inner
boundaries and
emptiness
prohibitions
that arises
and the open
she's slightly
confrontation
distracted
of the
from
gender
presenting
will not have an
herself to the
effect.
outside world.
It will simply slip away.
This emptiness is
It will go somewhere
particularly
where
acute
these boundaries do
because
not exist.
firstly, she is
Not
generally
necessarily
oriented
physically.
towards feelings.
Perhaps
and
it will
secondly,
immerse itself
because she
in its
lives
own
by the scenario
imagination
of
where it is a
always and
constantly
everywhere,
changing personality,
feverishly and
the one it
chaotically
wants to
searching for
embody.
any emotional experiences.
At this specific moment,
the
our
absence
world
of these
is rigidly
experiences
regulated
is like
and
withdrawal
overflowing
for a
with
drug
various
addict.
kinds of prescriptions, with punishment following for non-compliance. This feeling of pressure from the external world involves the demand to choose once and for all boundaries, to define a set of social roles. The pure often chooses the option of finding a protector, a support, who will set these boundaries for him. Thus, the Puer builds relationships with sex. The Puer and Puella can be characterized by one word: devouring. In psychology, there is a concept of the devouring mother, but devouring fathers are not much less common. The desire to consume and digest, and thus make it part of oneself, is expressed in one's own intentions. Jung tells the story of a 25-meter-long transformation. I stood for a long time observing her face and asking myself what kind of expression it was. It was the most unusual expression of a person who seemed convinced that the thing was black, and for whom it was very important that it was black, but who was suddenly shown that it was red. It was a look full of pleasant surprise. At the moment she shot herself, she first understood what life was. Sometimes we have to severely traumatize ourselves to understand what life is. This shows how unconscious people are. There are also children who grow up too early. This is the complete opposite of poor. As a rule, it is the senex. Neglected children, but not always. The hardships of life have forced them to become very realistic, independent, and disillusioned. With the bitter expression on their face, one can usually say that something went wrong too early. They were displaced from childhood. Such people cannot love or trust anyone. In such a situation, life has no meaning because they have lost the magical aspect of eternal youth. They always seem not quite real. The adult analyst faces the difficult task of returning them to their childhood fantasies to properly deal with the inner child. The inner child is understood as something that arises from the maturity of the adult. It is not a regression to infantilism, but rather a progress towards wholeness. The inner child is present in everyone, even in very elderly people who often seem to regress to a childlike state. As we grow older, we enter the world of the senex, which in Latin means old man. It also has positive and negative sides. In a positive sense, he is patient, conscientious, and not inclined to take risks. Here he appears as the archetype of the wise old man. The negative side of the senex is cynicism, cruelty, materialism, unwillingness to change, and lack of humor. The senex is the opposite of the pure archetype. It's like two sides of the same coin. The senex is the shadow of the pure, associated with the god Apollo. Discipline, control, responsibility, rationality, and order. Conversely, the shadow of the senex is the pure, related to Dionysus, unbounded, instinctive, chaotic, drunk, and lustful. The pure dreams of many things, while the senex works diligently. The balance between the two varies from person to person. Both live within us and are necessary for psychological health. Imbalance in any direction is undesirable. To integrate the poor, a person must descend from the heavens to the earth. The second step is that the poor Stop
must
living an
ensure that they
imaginary
do not
life
get
and
lost
dedicate
in the
themselves
crowd.
to the mundane,
They must
domestic
simultaneously
tasks
sacrifice
and
their
hard work.
inflated uniqueness
The
and
pure
delusions
must
of
merge with
grandeur,
the crowd,
which constitute
the
a false
dangerous
individuality,
situation is treated by a
and not
dangerous
lose their true
situation.
individuality by becoming
This
ordinary.
is the first step towards healing.
A balance between social
Only
and
by
spiritual
immersing
life
into
is
society
crucial.
can one feel
One
the
must
warmth
spend
of
time
people,
alone to create the
gain a
foundation
sense of
necessary
belonging
for
to a tribe that
self-realization.
surpasses individual desires.
When I am among many, I live like many, and do not think as I truly do. After a while, it seems as though they want to expel me and take my soul from me.
I get angry with everyone, and then I need the desert to become kind again. I compare life to the passage of the sun over 12 hours. The sun rises and we start the day. The sun is high. We are young. The sun reaches its zenith, and this is the middle of life, the peak of our abilities and energy. If we are on the right path, success and career follows. Then the sun begins to lose its height. We age until it finally sets, and we die. These phases of life have different priorities and special types of psychology. The priority of the first half of life is the enhancement of ego, work, education, relationships, etc. Only in the second half of life are we sufficiently attached to reality, and our attention shifts to the inner world. Imbalance in this transition often becomes the beginning of a midlife crisis, the dark night of the soul. Jung says that to heal the Puer's neurosis, working is the most unpleasant word for him. The second most unpleasant after responsibility, because he has to sacrifice the wonders of the fantastic world for this mundanity. It seems like complete madness to him because he releases his uniqueness. The most important step is that he must exorcise his demons, but not his angels. This can be achieved through competent integration, which I detail in my course, Alliance with the Shadow. There will be many practical exercises that will allow you to view your dark sides differently and integrate them rather than reject them, as the problem is not in the shadow, but in resisting and reacting to it. The shadow is necessary, but suffering is not. As Frank Herbert, who wrote the great mystical fantasy book Dune, said, "I face my fear. I let it pass through me, and when it is gone, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain." Thanks to work, the Puer can truly become exceptional in his own right, not in fantasies. It doesn't matter much if a person doesn't know what work suits them and what they truly want to do. They must stick to any job and immerse themselves in the external world. Egger calls this type of anxiety dizziness from freedom, meaning dizziness arising from the need to choose from a sea of endless possibilities. Here, a person can either get lost in imitation of others or in endless possibilities, being in an analytical paralysis where they only think about opportunities but do not act. The Puer usually tries different jobs but cannot settle on one because it seems boring to him. He might work but will find it routine because he works uphill against his own flow of energy. The Puer knows that everything is going wrong because he is lazy, but he cannot help but be lazy, so he remains in melancholy. We all have a huge reserve of enthusiasm that remains hidden until we integrate this archetype of eternal youth. The unconscious indicates the direction where energy flows naturally. Nevertheless, we always have to deal with routine. Any job, even the most creative, has routine elements, which the Puer complains about. In terms of how one should live, Jung wrote that there is no specific path for personality. If you want to go your individual way, then it is the path you carve yourself. The Puer is never prescribed to adventure in the hero's journey, emerges when you place which separates a person from their previous life, and if you do what is necessary, you will confidently follow the path at the stage of refusal, unconscious, and cannot leave the ordinary world. It is pointless to speculate on how you should live, where he will have to confront his dragon. That we should not waste time his greatest fear, futile speculations about how to live, situation, but rather just plow the ground right in front of us. Thus, he cannot access his something meaningful and the treasure chest full of inner gold guarded by the dragon. The Puer remains in eternal stagnation because he cannot achieve the insight that comes from psychological death and rebirth, the death of the old self and the birth of the new, more capable self. Without this, individuation cannot occur. In some Native American rituals, men gather boys in the middle of the night, take them out, and drag them into the desert where they must undergo trials for their initiation into adulthood. This is the beginning of the hero's journey. If he succeeds in killing his dragon, he will re-enter the community as a person who has left the realm of childhood. Manhood is different from just being a man. It is an honor that must be earned. It signifies a sense of autonomy and growth of ego strength, a sense of belonging, value, and meaning. The Puer, often driven by a desire for security or pleasure, finds initiation in throwing oneself into the fire of life. Unfortunately, we no longer have the rituals that our primitive ancestors had. So a man chooses from what is available, perhaps military service or gym mentality. Some young people hope that something in life, engaged in mundane, such as being cast onto an island where they need to survive by lighting a fire and taking shelter from the rain, hunting for food, etc., will simultaneously terrify and inspire them. In psychological terms, they wait for the archetype to activate in their psyche and help them orient themselves in life. For a young woman, courage in giving birth to children can defeat the Puer. There is an archetype of sacrifice to embody the archetype of the mother. She must place the archetype of Aphrodite on the altar and accept the fact that her body will look completely different after giving birth. This is a huge responsibility. Motherhood often becomes the cause of the Puer's demise. However, this does not mean that there are no cases where the mother still remains Puer. Another path for a woman is the heroine's journey, which is written about by Maureen Murdoch in her book of the same name. At first glance, it may seem like the same thing, only in profile. Yes, a woman also undergoes trials and in the end achieves wholeness. However, women's needs differ from men's, and this inevitably affects the story. For the heroine, the illusion that there is a man who will solve all her problems is more dangerous than the most terrible monster. Believing in such an illusion, the heroine returns to the beginning of her journey. She ceases to be a modern heroine and becomes a traditional damsel in distress. A good example of the heroine's journey is the story of Hero's journey, which I have already discussed in a separate video. If you want me to make a video on the heroine's journey, write in the comments. Dreams are an important source of integrating the Puer. When the inner child appears in a dream, it is always both behind and ahead at the same time. Behind us stands the infantile shadow, what always pulls us back depending on laziness and fleeing from problems. To become a hero, one must sacrifice oneself. The child god ahead of us signifies renewal, the possibility of life that is constantly growing and expanding. When our ego's relationships change, dreams react. It would be a big mistake to bury the child. From the unconscious by recording. Many people equate today's understanding of adult life with an ideal and observing dream images. In reality, the natural transition from enthusiastic play to serious work is interrupted when we feel that a large part of what we spend our time on as adults is giving it new life. I think Jung was right what to do with our lives, and we need not regaining the seriousness that was present in childhood as the dream understands us. The child impatiently awaits becoming an adult, chopping wood, participating in battles, competing with everyone. Only when the reality of being an adult presents itself in the form of emotional numbness, cynicism, and brutal pragmatism do many stop developing. This is likely not a fault, but a warning sign that we need to take seriously if we want to survive as a species, in a world of naked kings and imitators of adults who mistakenly equate submission with maturity. I see the child breaking through this nonsense to what has not yet been conditioned. This child is the reason for our hope. Well, friends, thank you for spending time with me watching this video. If you liked it, please like and comment. Do you have traits of Puer or Puella? And do you have such acquaintances? How do you interact with them? If you need help, let me know.